I ran as fast as I could, and I could hear his footsteps right behind me, getting faster and faster and faster. My parents, when they did eventually come to see me, walked past the end of the bed because they didn't recognise me. And the lady in the bed opposite, she said, "What did you do to deserve that? You're coming to me 16 years afterwards to say, we think it might be the Yorkshire Ripper." Makes me really cross, actually. I turned the tables and I objectified him. My name is Maureen Lea, and I'm a survivor of a very brutal attack by Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper, which happened in 1980. I'm an artist and a campaigner, and this is my story. In 1980, it was a few days before my 21st birthday, and I was out with friends in a small pub in the student area of Leeds called Headingley. After a few drinks, and we thought we'd better leave early because at the time there was a curfew on women that shouldn't be out walking home alone. My boyfriend that day had gone down to London to take part on a campaign for nuclear disarmament, a CND march. So for the first time I was on my own. I was with friends, but I had to leave them at a certain part of the journey home from the pub. And we got to the corner of the park and they insisted, "Should we just walk you to your bus stop?" I was absolutely not having it. I thought, no. I'm an independent person. I'm not going to be having people chaperone me around. It was very quiet. There weren't many people around us. It used to be quite busy at that time of night on a Saturday. So I carried on walking. And I got to the outskirts of the campus and thought, if I take a shortcut, I can get into town quicker. As I was walking down this road, someone called out from behind me, and they sounded very, very familiar. And I thought, I must know them. It must be someone from the pub or someone from the art school. And I turned towards him and saw this young man who was walking towards me and very chatty, very friendly. And I realised I didn't recognise him. And he was also holding himself really strangely. He was standing in an odd position. So I went a bit closer to see if I recognised him. No. And I decided I'd turn away and I would just carry on with my journey. So quite politely said, "Bye, see you." And as I turned to walk to the end of the road, I could hear his footsteps increasing behind me. And it was at that point I realised I was in some serious danger. So I thought, right, I'm gonna walk briskly. And the faster I walked, and then I started to run, the adrenaline really kicked in. And I ran as fast as I could, and I could hear his footsteps right behind me, getting faster and faster and faster. Then the next thing I knew, I got this massive whack to the top of my head. And I just saw the pavement coming up towards me, and I blacked out. I didn't know what had happened. I had no idea what was going on. I was completely unconscious. And it transpires later that the attacker was disturbed while he was leaning over me and I was on the floor. My head was in the gutter and I was choking on my own blood. And the couple saw what had happened, a bit curious because it was quite dark, and started towards this sight of a person lying on the floor and this man wielding a hammer over me, about to go in for his last blow. And he saw them and stopped and ran off. And that's what saved my life. And that's why I'm here today to tell the story. And eventually an ambulance did come and I was taken to St. James's Hospital and I was heavily sedated and I couldn't talk because my jaw was completely cracked open and it kind of fell like this. And of course all the other head injuries, including the hammer blow, had given me a fractured skull, a fractured cheekbone, and this jaw which was cracked completely open, and scars over my face was so swollen and bruised. My parents, when they did eventually come to see me, walked past the end of the bed because they didn't recognise me. So I'm looking out through this mask of horror, but I couldn't see it. but everyone around me was looking at me as saying, what has happened to you? And the lady in the bed opposite, she said, what did you do to deserve that? Which was a really strange thing to say. But it shows that there was this kind of misogyny, and it must have been a man who hated you. You'd done something wrong. You'd done something to deserve it. It was quite alarming. My neck had narrowly missed a major injury where 2 screwdrivers had been stabbed into the back of my skull and just missed my spinal cord by millimetres, I since learned. And as a result, I was very, very wooden, and I could just about walk after a few days. It took some doing. But this fueled the creative process in me as a young artist, and I made a lot of satirical artwork about my experiences in the hospital and what it felt like to be this victim of this very brutal attack, which no one could understand why it had happened and what I'd done to deserve it, or how I'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was very, very confusing time and a very dark and depressing time for me. Part of this series of drawings, I was so angry about what had happened to me. I drew with anger. I think it took me about half an hour to produce a picture of what I wanted to do to the person who had attacked me. I wanted them to have the same injuries as me, because on my 21st birthday, I woke up in hospital with my jaw wired up and my injuries still healing, and I looked a mess. I felt a mess. So I got 2 pens, one in each hand, and I drew this kind of semi-skull with all the wires and the apparatus that had to keep my mouth open while my jaw was broken and wired together. All my teeth were wired together, and scars and pipes and tubes and everything that happened during the operation, I illustrated in this really violent, horrible image of this grotesque head. And it was called revenge. I was so angry about what had happened to me. Who could have done that to me? I just wanted them, the perpetrator, to feel the same way I was feeling. And that came out as a massive picture. It was A1 and it was drawn really quickly, so lots of gestural marks and lots of detail as well. And that was part of one of the pieces of work that went on my final degree show. Much to the shock of people, because before then, as an art student, I was drawing butterflies, pretty flowers, and drawing from nature, and I loved nature and natural forms and seashells and fossils. But now I had a purpose. I had to somehow articulate what had happened to me through the medium of my artwork, because I couldn't talk about it, and I didn't want to talk about it. I wanted to just move on, and the only way I could move on was to make these dark images, and that was my saving grace. That was a wonderful therapeutic outlet. I remember at one point I was in a hospital bed and a police officer arrived, plainclothes police officer, and another chap with a really nice, fancy, large format camera. And they wanted to take photographs of my injuries, which they did. And then he tried to take a report, and then at the end of it said, well, if we're going to take this seriously, we'll come and interview you again. And I was, take this seriously? You know, I could be dead if people hadn't interrupted this attack. And as it was, it transpires that the police were being heavily criticised by Margaret Thatcher at the time because they could not find the Yorkshire Ripper. And as a result of that, they downplayed my attack because it didn't really suit them. They wanted to keep their reputation as best they could, which was slowly diminishing. And if I'd been labelled as another potential Ripper victim, that there would have been people banging on police office doors. The community and the public were outraged that a massive police force couldn't find this individual, which had been attacking women for at least 5 years maiming them or killing them. And then in January, I was due to go back to the university to finish, to start the completion of my final work. And they'd announced that they'd caught this man and they'd given him a name called Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper. I was at home watching TV and his face came up, and that's when I recognised that was the man who tried to talk to me. That was the man who tried to lure me into his brutal attack, who was wanting to kill me. And that's when I got scared and realised something was happening. I fell to my knees. I couldn't believe that the person who'd attacked me was this notorious serial killer. 16 years later, after the attack, the police officers phoned me and they wanted to interview me. And I said, "Is this about Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper?" on the landline at home. And he was like, "We're not allowed to say anything." And I said, "If you want to speak to me, you'll have to come to the police station close by." And they did come. And the only reason they came is because they had to justify their story, because a TV documentary series was coming out examining the hidden victims, the forgotten victims of Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper. And they were being asked to contribute to the documentary. So they were pushed and forced to come and visit me and other survivors as well who weren't recognised at that time. And I was absolutely shocked, and I laughed at them. I said, "So you're coming to me 16 years afterwards to say we think it might be the Yorkshire Ripper?" But they said, "No, we can neither confirm nor deny that it was Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper." The Home Office initiated an investigation into how the West Yorkshire Police mishandled the Peter Sutcliffe case and all that happened throughout at least a period of 7 years. And they were sent up to Leeds. A very prestigious, very experienced retired police officer came and then wrote a massive report, which was printed and given back to the Home Office in the hope that the West Yorkshire Police would act upon it. The report was written in 1981, just a handful of months after Sutcliffe was convicted and imprisoned. And it was a massive, very thorough piece of research. And what happened, they gave it to the West Yorkshire Police, and the West Yorkshire Police filed it, hid it, didn't act on it. And there's an incredible part of that journal, that investigation, that revealed that there were possible other Ripper victims, and they refused to act upon this. Makes me really cross, actually. Just, that is outrageous. Well, we got him in prison. Well, he's killed so many women. Well, the others have survived, and these possible other names. What's it to them? They're all right. They're alive. We don't need to go over this, do we? Because it's all done and dusted. And it's not with me. No way. We're going to see justice for those other women. It's the last thing I do. In about 2016, there was a book published by Chris Clark and Tim Tate, and it looked at all of the victims of Peter Sutcliffe and their survivors, and the people like me whose stories were never told. So I bought 2 copies of the book, and I wrote a letter to Peter Sutcliffe and sent it to him in prison, saying, "Please confess, you know you've done these things." And he did know he'd done these things. He was holding his cards close to his chest. Sutcliffe had power over the other victims that weren't disclosed by the police, and he enjoyed that power. After I'd sent the letters and got a kind of polite response, "Thank you for your interest," I actually got a letter from Theresa May saying that she had great empathy with what had happened and would try and pursue as best she could, asking for further investigations to take place. So there was a constant battle And then I thought, right, I'm going to write my own story. And I started to write in small bits of manuscript in pieces, like a patchwork, over the years, and eventually got my book published, and it was called Facing the Yorkshire Ripper, The Art of Survival. And that went out, and I sent a copy of that to Peter Sutcliffe as well when he was in prison and alive. Now, he passed away about 2 or 3 years ago, and the press came to my door and they said, "What do you think?" And I said, well, what he did hasn't gone away. What happened hasn't gone away. The attacks haven't gone away. They haven't died. The victims are still alive. Their families who've been affected by this are still alive. When you've survived something so horrific and you've known that you've been so close to death, it actually gives you an edge in a strange way. One of the films that I've been involved in is with a wonderful art house filmmaker called Roberto Duke, and he and I are doing a collaborative piece of work about my artwork. And one of the scenes within the film is, after much thinking and a lot of good therapy, we decided it might be a good idea for me to draw the Ripper in this iconic photograph where he's got a bow tie at his wedding, and then be filmed actually ripping it up. So the camera was set, I got the drawing, and I'm drawing all the detail, all the dark hair, the dark eyes that had looked into my eyes, and I was treating it like a challenge. It was just a drawing test, was the facial anatomy correct? Did I get the look? Did I get his face recognizable? So I went through this really kind of clinical process of drawing this Ripper face, the face of the Yorkshire Ripper. So he was no longer objectifying me as a target that he could have killed. I turned the tables and I objectified him. And I'm filmed ripping up the Ripper, ripping through his face, ripping through his eyes and his mouth, and all the shards of paper fall to the floor. And I walk over the ripped up drawing of the Ripper out of shot. And it's the most empowering thing I've ever done. It was just brilliant to objectify him and just rip him up, treat him as a little object of trash. Very empowering.